All right, let's talk some worst. No time for positivity here on Jackson Kruger Sports YouTube channel. We're talking negatives. These are my picks for the top 7 worst head coaches entering the 2022 NFL season. Now, worst could be worst for several different reasons. So I want to make sure I talk about that because some of these guys, I don't think that they're necessarily bad. It's more so there's just about 25 other head coaches I would take over you, which is a very, real thing. Some of these guys are just unknowns. Some, I think that what I do know about you isn't great. I don't actually think any of these guys are horrible. There is no Matt Patricia this year. There is no Adam Gase this year. And I should also mention, my opinion to these guys can change. I had Zach Taylor as my 32nd ranked head coach when we did our head coaching rankings on the podcast last year. So my opinions on these guys can change. They will prove me wrong. Evaluating head coaches is a difficult thing to do in general, but, it's also a fun thing to do. I always love a good list. It can spark some controversy, which is entertaining. So let's just get into it, and we'll start off with number 7. Number 7, I'm starting off with Brian Daboll here, which, listen, I actually like a lot of what I've seen from Brian Daboll. I do. I think there's stuff to like about him for sure. Also, the NA on that's just his win percentage as a head coach, but he obviously is a new head coach, so we haven't seen that yet. I guess for Daboll, my concern about him is he was, for the most part, kind of a career, just a journeyman, interim, not interim, but like a journeyman coach of just several different things, right? He kind of always seemed like an assistant type guy, gets an offensive coordinator job and completely knocked it out of the park with Josh Allen. I guess the only question that I have and why I'm a little bit lower on him, but again, a big part of it is he's a new head coach. Who knows? A big part of it, too, though, is are we maybe giving him too much credit for what he did with Josh Allen? Maybe not. Maybe what he did was actually completely developed Josh Allen, and he was the reason Josh Allen developed. Or maybe Allen was going to develop anyways, and Daboll now just gets all the credit for it. We just don't know. We can't prove one way or the other definitively on that. So that's why I'm a little bit lower on him. But again, like I said, I don't think there's any glaring bad head coach out of the 32. So I do feel higher about him than maybe him being on the list would go with. But listen, got to put 7 guys. He's my 7th guy. Number 6, Dennis Allen, who the record, I actually don't think you should hold the record against him too much. So 8-24 as a head coach. That was with his 2 years with the Raiders. But can you really blame him that much? Those Raiders teams were awful. I don't know what he could have done. That's the team that would never spend money. They had no money. I don't hold that against him too much. And Dennis Allen has done some legitimately really good things with this Saints defense. I mean, his defensive coaching has been very good. The X's and O's I like and don't really have too much of an issue with. I think the one thing I would hold maybe a little bit against him compared to some other guys is listen, yes, I don't hold the Raiders stuff against him too much, but he did still have a try before and didn't work out too well. And he was, working with Sean Payton. So while the X's and O's were very good, and obviously Payton was the offensive guy and Allen was the defensive guy, how much of it was really because of Dennis Allen? I don't know. Again, I love Dennis Allen as a defensive coordinator, but I'm not judging defensive coordinators. I'm judging head coaches. To me, he's just a big wild card, and so I'm going to dock him a little bit. One other thing I want to mention is that historically, it does happen a decent amount where a good defensive mind becomes a head coach and doesn't really succeed at the head coaching position, and their defensive X's and O's don't look as good once they're a head coach and have to spend more time focused on other stuff. So that's kind of why I might be a little bit higher on some other offensive guys as well, just simply because that's what the history of the NFL has taught me. Number 5, Matt Eberflus, the new Chicago Bears head coach, who was from the Colts. And again, another guy who the X's and O's were very good with Indianapolis. His, as a coordinator, he's clearly good, and I think that he earned the starting job. I don't hate the decision whatsoever, but he's another guy who's just a big unknown. We don't know much about him. Will the defensive coordinating stuff, what X's and O's kind of take a step back now that he has a bit more stuff on his plate? That does certainly happen at times, and I think it's fair to be a little concerned that it could potentially happen with Eberflus. I do. So that's kind of my main reason, I guess, why I would put him on this list. It's just that, and he's unknown, and also it's hard to blame him too much for this exact part, but I do feel like the Bears have really punted on this season, it seems like, and kind of, taken some of the stuff I don't love about the Colts, into the following year were like, not signing free agents, not really seemingly valuing the wide receiver position too much, which that's not how I value team building. I don't know how much to put on him, but I'm going to put some of it on him. Number 4, Matt Rhule, who has a not great win percentage at just over 30% of his games he's won. Again, one thing that I have to mention with Rhule is a lot of it is talent. Like, I actually think Rhule's kind of getting a raw deal in Carolina. Like, he hasn't had much talent to work with. I'm sorry, you need talent to win football games, and part of it has simply just been injuries with the Panthers, and then part of it has been, like, really bad offensive line, and you have Sam Darnold as your quarterback. You're not going to do too great. Like, Bridgewater was all right and played all right for them 2 years ago. However, this is just something where he's going to have to figure stuff out quickly, and you could also put some of the blame on, like, he apparently wanted Sam Darnold, so that also, like, that factors in. Like, you shouldn't have wanted Sam Darnold. That was definitely a mistake. Number 3, I'm going with a guy who has a Super Bowl ring and has a above 600 win percentage, multiple ties on his record, Mike McCarthy, who, listen, his numbers are very good. He also, he did have Aaron Rodgers for all that time. And I would also say, like, not to completely discredit him, like, he was at one point, like, a good head coach. And I think that, he did a good job at developing Aaron Rodgers. And I think, seems like the player development in general is a strength in his column. So that stuff, like, there are some good qualities of his, head coaching stuff. I think one of the issues I have personally is that he hasn't been a good coach in several years now. We're going back, like, when's the last time you feel like, oh yeah, that was a well-coached game by Mike McCarthy? It doesn't really happen. One thing that McCarthy has done a good job of, which is a big part of a head coach, is getting good coordinators. But again, the question is he good at that, or did he get lucky with that? Like, I didn't love the Dan Quinn hire when it happened. I thought that his scheme was outdated, but then Dan Quinn, did some good stuff, I thought. And maybe that's Mike McCarthy, sort of working with Quinn. I don't know. But there's just too many mistakes I've seen with Mike McCarthy. He completely squandered those last couple of years in Green Bay, and that was recently enough that I still count that. And I don't think it's done incredible necessarily with Dallas in 2 years that he's been there. He also, the clock management stuff is obviously a big issue, and he's just someone where it's like, if you tell me, like, who would you rather have to head coach your team, Eberflus or McCarthy? Like, give me Eberflus. Like, like, whoever it is, like, give me an unknown over McCarthy, I think. Number 2, Pete Carroll, who is kind of similar here. I just think Pete Carroll is stuck in the past. I think Pete Carroll is still trying to win the 2013 Super Bowl, which, like, that was the last time, the Legion of Boom, that was kind of the last team that won the Super Bowl that way. Now, the Broncos did it a couple years later, but they weren't trying to. Like, that just kind of worked out. Like, the Seahawks were the last team that, have intentionally said, we're going to be a heavy running team who, plays good defense, and we're going to try to win that way, and did and won the Super Bowl. And they still had, really good quarterback in Russell Wilson, who, was solid that year. He wasn't as dominant as we've seen him now, but was still solid that year. And like guys like Doug Baldwin. So, that team was just loaded all together. And it feels like Pete Carroll is not really adjusting much. He's now gotten rid of Russell Wilson. The Seahawks have, again, I don't know if that's him, but I'm assuming he had a part of it. The Seahawks, they drafted a running back in round 2. It's just not the way I think football works in the year 2022. I think the Seahawks are going to, be tough next year. And I do think that Pete Carroll has to change things. Finally, number 1, Lovie Smith. So my top 3 guys on this list, all guys who have, coached a Super Bowl at a certain point. Lovie Smith, though, has failed at now multiple different NFL coaching situations. I think there's stuff to like about Lovie Smith. Like, one thing that people say about Lovie is that he's seemingly just like a great guy. Like, it seems like people really like being around him, and there is certain value in that. I remember when he was with Tampa Bay, like, people really liked Lovie, and were a little sad that he left, even though he only won 8 games in 2 years with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I thought he did a fine job with the Texans defense last year, but literally there was no way that defense was going to be good regardless. I do think that, again, another guy who the Tampa 2 stuff, just very outdated, doesn't really work, I don't think, as well as maybe you would think. But at the same time, we are seeing teams play a lot more cover 2 recently, and maybe because of that, maybe it's kind of one of those weird things where his scheme has become so outdated that it is now back to being the scheme that people do now. That could be an interesting thing if that happens, because strategy can be kind of circular there. But again, with Lovie Smith, basically the way I see it is, I just want to see it. It's been so long since I've seen one of his teams like do well. I'm going to kind of bet against him until I see one of them do well. Similar with why I have Belichick as number one. It's like, I've seen you do so much good. I'm going to keep betting on you until you tell me not to, or until you prove that I shouldn't. And same thing with Lovie Smith, just the inverse. So that's what I think. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.